Welcome back everybody to our study of metaphysics. In this lesson what we're going to do is move on to the next major topic within this subject. We're going to talk about the concept of ontology. And what we're going to do is take an introduction to the subject of ontology in this lesson, talk about generally what ontology is, before then looking at the different kinds of categories of ontology and the purpose of expressing ontological commitments. And really, ontology is where we want to begin when it comes to the subject of metaphysics, because in many ways, ontology grounds a lot of our understandings in philosophy, not just in metaphysics. And so it's important that we examine what ontology is and how best we can start to think about the grounding of our understandings of metaphysics and ontological commitments. So, the first question, and probably the easiest question that we're going to have to ask in this lesson, is what is the study of ontology? And ontology is quite easy to define because it is a subtopic within the broader subject of metaphysics, and it essentially concerns itself with the subject of being. What does this mean? Well, you can think of ontology as something of a fundamental building block for broader metaphysical inquiry. And in doing so, essentially what it does is it gives us information about our commitments to truth and reality, how we group objects together on the basis of fundamental characteristics, and essentially the examination of the existence of those kinds of entities, whether they be concrete or abstract. In this way, one may also be able to think of ontology as a subject which almost permeates all of philosophical inquiries, since if we want to strip back any of philosophy far enough, we can have to eventually reach a point where we're talking about ontological commitments. It has important bases, should I say, in all other major branches of metaphysics. And so this is why we are going to begin our study of metaphysics by looking at ontology and examining ontology using a number of different lessons and examining a number of different philosophical theories pertaining to it. Now, because this is an introduction to ontology, and next week we'll start to talk about some of the more detailed understandings of how ontology has been approached by philosophers in the past, talking about, for example, the work of Quine and Quinean ontological commitments. This lesson is going to just talk a little bit more about different types of ontologies which may exist. Ultimately, we delineate the different kinds of ontologies on the basis of their theoretical commitments to various ways in which we can categorize entities which may or may not exist. So the various categorizations are really where we've delineated the different bases of varieties of ontology. And we can explore this briefly in this lesson by talking about, firstly, the idea behind monocategorical ontologies and then polycategorical ontologies. These are the two major broad categorizations and delineations in which ontology is based. So beginning first then, what do we mean when we're talking about different kinds of monocategorical ontologies? Well, these are essentially a variety of ontological theories which posits the existence of single categories by which objects and ideas are formulated. And that's simply it. Given the fact that they are monocategorical, we're talking about single, i.e. mono, categories for which we can delineate and formulate objects and ideas. Polycategorical ontologies, on the other hand, as the name suggests that there are different fundamental ways in which we can categorize different ontological commitments. Polycategorical ontologies, for example, reject the monocategorical perspective. The polycategorical perspective stipulates that at the fundamental level, one can identify a variety of different ways in which we can have commitment to ontological thoughts. Now, essentially, monocategorical ontologies have the advantage of being simpler in being able to essentially delineate between different ways in which one can be ontologically committed to certain propositions or objects. But on the other hand, it is less flexible in its ability to allow for the existence of certain entities and the non-existence of other entities. And ultimately, the inverse is true for polycategorical ontologies, as you would probably understand and imagine. Finally, then, let's think about ontology as grounding. Many philosophers will stipulate that ontology is useful for the grounding of metaphysical and reality-based principles. And on this account, we talk about this idea of having ontological commitments. Now, we're going to get on to talking about ontological commitments in future lessons' time in more detail, and the methods by which some of the most prominent philosophers in this area have established this theory, namely the Quinean method for ontological commitments. But as a basic overview here, the idea of ontological commitments refers to methods by which we commit to being and the existence of things. So to what extent can we fundamentally commit to the existence of certain propositions, objects, and abstract entities? And it is from here that we can build ontological commitments to formulate more substantive arguments in advanced and complex areas of metaphysics and philosophy. This is why ontology is foundational and a fundamental part of study when it comes to philosophy, because essentially we are talking about taking the most fundamental minutiae of existence and finding ways to commit to said existence in order for us to then start to build up our theories of metaphysics more complexly. It also allows us to essentially move away from a kind of ontological nihilistic interpretation of reality, which stipulates that nothing exists and nothing can exist, or there is no way of telling whether or not something exists or not. All of which is very interesting for our understanding of philosophy and useful for debate and useful when we talk about the kinds of ways in which we can verify statements, but not quite very useful when we're talking about other complex areas of metaphysics, like the philosophy of time, for example, and or modalities.